This is a presentation for the Altar Guild of St. Mark's Cathedral in Salt Lake City. Today we will be going through the Sunday morning pre-service setup. This is the checklist that you find in the sacristy, and it's pretty detailed, so you probably won't need to cross-reference with the manual, but do keep in mind that the manual is a font of information. Today we'll be going through this checklist, and I will offer a bit more detail and also photo illustrations. But first, let's look at the different altars and tables in the sanctuary. These all play an important role in the Sunday morning communion service. First of all, on the left-hand side, we have the high altar. And in the photo, it's already set up for the Sunday morning service with the gospel book standing on the left-hand side and the dressed chalice in the center. To the right of the high altar, in reality, as well as on this slide, is the high credence table. This is where we keep backup elements in case they run out during the service. And then continuing clockwise from the high credence table, we come to the chancel credence table. And we call this the chancel credence table because this area between the communion rails that you see in the corner of this photo and the rood screen, the large decorative metal screen at the head of the steps here, that area is called the chancel. So this is the chancel credence table. It's also the table that's right next to the acolyte pews, which would be about here, and next to this doorway that leads into the passage to the hall and the door to the sacristy. Down here at the bottom left is the freestanding altar, and the object on the freestanding altar is the mic. When removing the dust cover, just make sure that the mic stays in position there. And then when you come down the steps next to the pulpit, we have the low credence table. This is where we keep the elements for the floor station during the communion service. And then finally, in the back of the nave, we have the credence table. That's the one near the great doors. And in this photo, it still has its dust cover on it, as does the chancel credence table in the photo above. And that takes us to the first item on the checklist. Remove all dust covers from chancel and nave and hang on rod in sacristy. In the photo, they're hanging there, folded on the rod next to the desk in the sacristy. And we see their underside, which is the purple side. The purple side is used during Advent and Lent, but the rest of the church year, we just use the green side. So first, the second bullet point, do keep in mind that the dust cover near the great doors can just be left folded on the shelf in the table. So this one, we can just fold up and place it on this shelf. And sometimes someone else will do that for us. And again, when you're removing the dust cover from the freestanding altar, make sure that the mic stays in the center towards this edge of the table. And then when you are taking the dust cover off the high altar, make sure that there's a corporal spread out in the center. And if it's missing, just get one from the sacristy and place it there. The checklist items, we don't have to be followed in order, but in this presentation, of course, I will follow the order that they appear on the checklist. So starting with the high altar, before taking the gospel book out and placing it upright on the altar, check the gospel passage in the bulletin for that Sunday and mark the gospel book with one of the ribbons inside the book. This just makes it easier for the person who will be reading from the gospel book. And then you stand it on the left side of the altar and place the vested chalice on the corporal that's spread out at the center of the altar, and make sure the covering, the vestment on the chalice is neatly organized as it is in this photo. And the rigid object on top is called the burse. The opening of the burse should face back. One other thing, the decorative brass cover on the gospel book is used during most of the church year, but during Lent, we will remove it. So during Lent, it'll just be the plain gospel book without the ornate brass cover. So next, we come to the high credence table to the right of the high altar. Here, we keep the backup elements, as I mentioned earlier. So we start by placing the medium wine cruet and the divided wafer box on the left, and leave room in the center for reserve elements. The reserve elements that go on the high credence table are the gluten-free wafers in the round silver box. So these elements on the left-hand side have not been consecrated, but in the center, we will place the consecrated gluten-free wafers. So that brings us to the next thing, which is to go to the Ambri in the chapel and get the reserve elements. Normally, there are 3 items in the Ambri: this hinged silver box with not the gluten-free, the regular wafers, and the glass cruet with the wine. What's missing in this photo is the round silver box with the gluten-free wafers. So normally it's those 3 items that are in the Ambri, and we are working, the next steps apply to situations where we're working with a standard amount of reserve consecrated elements. So that means each of these are about half full of wafers here, half full of wine in the glass cruet, and then the gluten-free wafer box would have about 25 wafers. So when we're working with the standard amount, this is what we do next. We put the consecrated gluten-free wafers in the round box in the center of the table on the high credence table, cover it with a partially unfolded purificator, and light the red candle. The lit candle signifies that the body of Christ is now present on the table. And then on the low credence table, we place the hinged wafer box at the center back, the wine cruet in front of that, and then cover it with a small post-communion veil and light the candle, again to signify the presence of Christ. Also place a chalice draped with a purificator to the left of the elements. And again, these elements will be used at the floor station during the communion service. The only reason the chalices in these 2 photos are different is that the photos were taken on different days. The last item on the slide says if there is more or less than the standard amount of reserve elements, follow the instructions on page 8 of the manual. So sometimes there's more or less than the standard amount. Again, the standard amount is what you see in this photo here, and then about 25 wafers in the gluten-free wafer box. When it's more or less, there are specific instructions to follow, and since that's not frequent, we've left them in the manual. Just refer to the manual as needed. And if there's some kind of situation that makes it difficult to know what to do, despite the instructions on the manual, then just ask a clergy person, and they should be able to guide you. Now we come to the chancel credence table, which is obviously the hardest working table on Sunday morning. Starting from the bottom, we place the altar book in its brass stand on the bottom shelf. The brass bells on the left-hand side live here, so we don't need to worry about them. And then the next shelf up, we place the alms basins, the stacked alms basins, and the large alms basin with the design in the middle goes on top of the table and sits in the slot at the back. So it's standing up on the back of the table. And since it has that design, be sure the design is right side up when you set it there. If a Eucharistic minister visit is scheduled, we place the traveling communion kits on the right side here. And in front of the communion kits, we place a larger folded post-communion veil. This is the veil that will be draped over all of the consecrated elements after the service. And then on the left-hand side is a lavabo bowl and a towel. You can't see the bowl because the towel is hiding it, but that's what's there. And then finally in the center, we place the empty ciborium and a chalice draped with a purificator. So we use 3 chalices on Sunday morning. We have the main chalice, vested chalice on the high altar. And let's just go back to that photo. So we have this chalice, we can call that chalice number 1. And this one for the floor station. And then this one that's also used at the high altar. So 3 chalices on Sunday morning, and that's how they're used. Finally, we go to the credence table at the back of the nave near the great doors. And once an usher is there for security purposes, place the filled ciborium, the square gluten-free wafer box, the large wine flagon, and the medium water cruet on the table with the bread, which is in the ciborium, and the wafer box in the center. Notice that these are all filled vessels. So the vessels that are on the high credence table are not filled. It's the empty ciborium, an empty chalice. But these vessels are filled. And these are the Eucharistic elements that are processed from the back of the church to the altar to represent the congregation offering the gifts of our labors and our lives to God. And then they are consecrated at the altar and become the body of Christ, which is then shared with us. That's all for today. Thank you.